When I stumbled upon this deuterium problem, I saw that there was almost 70 years of research on it, and it was overlooked. And
Yes, before we move
right.
on, is there anything that you know from the Russian research that hasn't been translated into English that you could share? And then we'll move into deuterium and DNA because that's a good topic.
Knowledge seeking is something I was doing from a very young age. Why? Because I didn't believe anything that anybody told me. You know, there's a whole strategy for deuterium depletion in nature. When you start looking at the migration of birds.
What have you got to say about gold? Because we could go on
Well,
for ages about frankincense and myrrh, but then gold, I know, is an area of interest for you. Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah, and today's guest is Victor Sagalovsky, who's the CEO of Lightwater. And he's going to start by discussing his journey into deuterium, which was driven by his inquiring mind and his interest in anti-aging, which started in his teenage years. We discuss many things in this podcast, but we start by talking about the biology of deuterium and its impact on mitochondria and the science behind how deuterium causes damage to the mitochondria, slows down energy production, but also can distort the structure of DNA, and this can lead to accelerated aging and disease. Victor also describes the geological, hydrological, and cosmological sources and influences of deuterium and how this influences deuterium levels in different parts of the planet. Victor describes some biblical references to deuterium and water, which then leads into a small discussion about spirituality, consciousness, the role of the neutron, and other metaphysical aspects of consciousness and energy production. Victor's also written a book on gold, so he touches on some of the health benefits of using gold as a medicinal product, but also some of the other aspects of gold relating to quantum biology and light. If you're interested in working with me, I've got a brand new, very basic quantum biology course, which is suitable for everybody, and a minerals course. Both of these now come with a free 15-minute Zoom if you get stuck and have questions, and the links are in the description. Welcome to the channel, Victor. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody what we're going to be talking about and all about yourself? Because you're a really interesting person and you've got a huge amount of knowledge, not just on deuterium, but on vast amounts of other aspects of science, including anti-aging.
I'm Victor Sagalovsky, and I wouldn't know where to begin about myself. But we're going to be talking about whatever you ask me. It's going to be, I assume, centered around deuterium and complementary topics. I've been interested in health ever since I realized that I can improve it, which was in my teenage years, and that has driven me down a path of inquiry unlike any that I could have imagined. So, if you want my bio, then it exists somewhere, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of people know you already because you're the CEO of Lightwater, and also you have a huge network as well. And you're hosting a really interesting conference in November, which we'll talk about because that'll help highlight some of your areas of expertise. So maybe if we start off with deuterium and aging and just see where we go from there, and we can talk about some other aspects of deuterium and the planet later.
So I created the brand Lightwater because I wanted to drink DDW. Something that I had pursued as a scientific interest since 2004, as far as I can remember, when I read an article that was entitled "In Search of the Fountain of Youth." And I was always enamored with Search of the Fountain of Youth because it's an amazing quest that we get introduced to perhaps early in life, where we start asking the right questions to distinguish why things are the way they are. In my case, it was centered around water, food, medicine, and whether we're getting the right information. So knowledge seeking is something I was doing from a very young age. Why? Because I didn't believe anything that anybody told me. So you have to answer these questions for yourself. And to learn to ask questions, you have to learn how to ask the right question. So I was very fortunate growing up with the right schooling and the right mentors that I learned how to ask a question properly. And if you do that, then you get the right answer. So here I am.
I think the question here is mitochondria are pivotal for aging, and you asked a lot of questions about the motor in the mitochondria and the deuteron. So obviously there's a huge connection just if we start with something like the mitochondria and the deuteron, because the professor who discovered this, as we were talking earlier, deserves a Nobel Prize, and you've met him as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Abdullah Olgun. So I notice certain things are overlooked. And when I stumbled upon this deuterium problem, I saw that there was almost 70 years of research on it, and it was overlooked. In some places, it was followed, but then on the academic side, once studies are finished or once anecdotal evidence is assembled, papers are published, this is not something that sees the light of day in a commercial aspect, meaning that if something has a benefit in research and shown and proven, how do we use this to better our lives? In this case, it's deuterium depleted water. Dr. Olgun is an interesting phenomenon because he's a dean of a medical university in Turkey. He's got like multiple medical degrees, and he wrote this paper in 2007. It actually appeared, I think, in the New York Annals of Medicine, appeared other places, where he talks about the mechanical problem of what deuterium is actually doing to the ATP synthase nanomotor inside our mitochondria. This is at the end of the electron transport chain. This is the motor generator that produces ATP. So for a long time before that, it was known that deuterium is bad, less deuterium is good. The Americans who in the 30s discovered that hydrogen had multiple isotopes quickly figured out that if you make heavy water, D2O instead of H2O, looks like water, smells like water, tastes like water, but in 3.5 days, you're dead because it doesn't work. It's not compatible with our metabolism. So that made them realize heavy water bad. And then the Russians figured out when they studied populations that had increased longevity, increased health span, less disease, living in very remote conditions, even giving birth into an age that is what we think is not possible. Some women even giving birth into the late 50s, early 60s. They're trying to figure out what these populations had in common and what they had that was a secret that nobody else had. Eventually, they came to the conclusion that it was the deuterium. They were drinking water that had 16 to 20% less deuterium. So then they did all the research with plants and animals and said, okay, less deuterium, good, more deuterium, bad. And then eventually in the 60s, they said, oh, that's very simple to explain. This must be the kinetic isotope effect because deuterium is twice as heavy, the mass. So of course it slows down biology, it interferes with everything. And there we have it. That's why it's bad. And that's it. And then someone not in the U.S., not in Cambridge or England, or not anywhere in Asia, somebody, a dean of a medical university, was wondering. I asked him the question. Was wondering if he's reading about deuterium in some journals here and there, and trying to understand more if this is bad for us, or if it's like others say, yes, it's bad for us, but there's not enough of it to make a difference, right? So 150 ppm in water, what's the big deal? Technically, it's bad for us, but everything's fine. So he goes, okay, let's take a look at, let's ask the right question first. And the right question for him was, how much of this deuterium by mole weight is there really in our body, in our blood plasma? Let's look at that. And then he looks at that and says, oh my goodness, there's 5 to 8 times more deuterium attached to every other molecule within it, compounded, more than glucose, than magnesium, than potassium, things that we need for our every moment existence. The basic the basic building blocks of our biology. So he said, wow, there's a lot more deuterium here than the basic constituents of life that we need to keep life going. So he said, well, what is this deuterium doing? So he looked everywhere, and he spent 2 years learning mathematical modeling to figure out this problem in the ATP synthase nanomotor. And this is very difficult to argue against. It's almost actually impossible, because he's revealing a mechanical problem that we have and how ATP is produced. We have a motor generator, a bunch of them, billions or trillions of them in our bodies, and they generate ATP, but they run on protons, and only protons. And once in a while, a proton neutron pair, which is double the mass. Instead of this, you're getting this, right? If you're a crude way of saying it is if you're dragging your dead twin around with you, because that's what it's like. And it slows you down, but it also doesn't get into this motor. It doesn't fit. So when it does go through there, it's a little wonky, and it causes the motor to stutter. So if you keep asking the right question, say, what's going to happen eventually? Well, that stutter happens every 7 to 10 seconds, every time a deuteron gets in there. In that moment, no ATP is produced. That causes a shear, and that stutter creates a situation where enzymes have to be brought in for repair. And that is constantly ongoing. Well, what is the natural conclusion of that? Natural conclusion of the stuttering of that motor is that it weakens the membrane in which it sits. And we all know you need that proton gradient to even create spin to create ATP. So as soon as you have leakage in that membrane, it's all over. You have a signal that goes out, senescence comes in, that factory is shut down. And that mitochondrion is put on hold until it can be repaired, which it never is. But there's a moment where at least the cell is still optimistic that let's put it into senescence and see if it'll repair itself, or we can bring it back. Maybe more energy will come in. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're hopeful. So these factories start shutting down as we age slowly. You look at a 12-year-old versus a 70-year-old. The body is willing, or the mind is willing, but the body is weak. The body is weak because it doesn't have the same amount of mitochondria per cell as that 12-year-old. Maybe it has a smarter brain or more wisdom, but it doesn't have the oomph, the charge, the energy, simply because the factories are closed down. And once, as you know, once they close down factories, they never reopen. So this is what's happening. And Dr. Olgun is a genius for honing in on that mechanical problem and exposing that for everybody. And when I read that, I looked around and I heard crickets. I go, well, that makes perfect sense, because throughout my whole life, I keep finding things that are completely overlooked. And I want them for myself. So I have to create a company around it. So, because there's no possible way I was going to get DEW, considering it was almost impossible to make. And I had tried myself for years to produce it. Luckily, and in the twist of fate and destiny, one might say, I went to Russia looking for DDW, because I know that's where they came up with it. That's where they invented it. That's where the original research in the depletion side was carried out in the Soviet Union. And sure enough, when I showed up in Russia, never had been there in my entire life, I could speak the language and understand the people. And that was surreal, because I came here when I was 7 years old from Kiev, and from the Soviet Union at the time. And I grew up American, but at home we spoke Russian. So my parents made sure I never forgot the language. So never used it much except with my family. And then I went back and I go, wow. So I was able to find the right people, the people that were serious, hardcore into this science, just as obsessed as I was, and had figured out a process for reducing the deuterium in water, which essentially is impossible, especially when you get down into the low levels that we do, 10 and 5 ppm. So it's doing the impossible. So I got really interested in the science, the provenance of where this comes from, the mystical aspects, the spiritual implications, the future. There's a lot to unpack here, and it has to do with health, It has to do with the evolution of our biology, and it has to do with great engineering. So these are all things that excite me. And
Yes, before
that's
we
where we're
move
at.
on, is there anything that you know from the Russian research that hasn't been translated into English that you could share? And then we'll move into deuterium and DNA because that's a good topic.
That's a great question, sir, because there is. I haven't been asked that question yet, and I have to think about what that is. But there's research that's even ongoing that hasn't been published, where we are looking to prove not only as Olgun did in the mathematical modeling of this, but actually prove the proton motive force is increased in the ATP synthase nanomotor and the electron transport chain. So we are having a conclusive proof of delta pH, and that's one bit of research. And then there's a lot of research. There's mouse studies that have never been seen, where these are great because also with dogs and even humans, but how it affects stress, radiation, like for space travel. I wrote a really important article I think everybody should read called "The Elephant in the Space Capsule." You just search for it online. It makes what I think is the definitive argument for having deuterium depleted water in space. If we're going to survive out there, we need this strategy really badly, especially if we want to go to other planets like Elon Musk does. So there is research along that front. There's research with glacial meltwater, which is deuterium depleted, which is a natural water, not made by mimicking the hydrological process and amplifying it like we do. So there's studies with there's like short-term studies with athletes. There was a great study at the horse track even a long time ago, back in the late 90s, 99, that they gave this horse about 20 gallons of DDW before a race, and it broke the course record, which still hasn't been broken. So there are a number of studies that haven't been translated. There's a lot there, and I have assembled the most extensive database of anything on deuterium depletion at deuteriumdepletion.org. Now, it's not up to date, but most everything is up there. So you'll find dozens and dozens and dozens of papers and studies and research materials. And I was quite obsessed with this, still am, but it was really important to me to understand and not only understand the science, but know where it came from and who are the major players as this unfolds. So that's where we're at.
Okay, that'll keep me busy and other people. What about the role or non-role of deuterium in DNA? Because we were talking before, and I know, even though my degree was in genetics and biochemistry, I know that there's a lot more to DNA than just a thing for transcribing and making proteins, the electromagnetic functions of it, and a lot deeper than that. So you were talking about deuterium occurring in DNA, and maybe you want to sort of elaborate on this because it might be something people have not come across before, because we're quite familiar with a deuteron getting into protein and changing the topology of it and how the water interacts with that protein and therefore the biochemistry. But how about the DNA and the deuterium or the deuteron?
The DNA is an interesting question because you have one deuteron. If you're drinking 150 ppm water, 99% of the population on the planet has one deuteron per 300 base pairs of DNA. So that's 1.5 million atoms of deuterium in our 3 billion atom genome of DNA. So 1 per 300, what does that do? Well, the question I ask is, what happens when that increases? Instead of 1, what if it's 2 or 3 or 4? Now, what happens, it distorts the shape of that DNA because it's double the mass. You need the perfect structure for proper replication. So what distortion does it need to take before it changes how it replicates? Because the speed of replication will also be affected. So these are just questions we don't really have any answers to. What fascinates me even more to a degree is collagen, because collagen, you could see the effects of aging. Even though DNA, you can see it too mathematically, but with collagen is a triple helix. So it also has a similar way of replicating. So it's just like double helix DNA, you have a triple helix collagen. And I noticed in my research of looking at supercentenarians, they all seem to have really good skin integrity. That's collagen integrity. And as above, so below. So that ultimately works its way down to double helix replication. So somewhere in there, they have better replication from DNA up through collagen, and that affects every kind of protein out there, all the protein folding that our bodies do. So that's interesting. To me, even more interesting is the quantum aspects of what deuterium is doing and the quantum tunneling aspect. Because when you start looking to that, even funner to look at it as a layman than a scientist, because you come to conclusions that have you scratching your head and have you questioning everything you ever learned. And it's nothing of a conspiratorial nature. It's just you understand, you are now understanding the true nature of things. So I could touch on that if you'd like.
Oh yeah, because actually we'll see where it goes, because yeah, as above, so below is one of my favorite expressions. But you've reminded me of something else, because we were talking about where the deuterium comes from in space, and then there is the Birkeland or Birkeland currents and the filamentous structures of plasma, which are helical, and then we've got the Birkeland currents in our helical systems in our body of the collagen and the DNA. So this can end up also going into sort of the spiritual side of deuterium. But before we move on into that, do you want to sort of link up the DNA and where the deuterium's actually coming from? Because I used to think it was coming from just the sun, and then I realized then water comes also from space. And then I've always wondered why there's more deuterium at the equator than there is at the poles. But then the way that the Birkeland currents enter the planet it is more polar. But again, this is an area that you also know about, so we could tie that as above and so below together with the Birkeland currents.
I mean, fascinating subject, really. The water in the oceans is about 155.76 ppm, and water on our planet, we hypothesize, and we can actually see through the geological record, that there's a cycle where it goes up and down in deuterium. And we can get a neutron enriched from anywhere, right? A neutron can be captured into anything. So if you leave some low deuterium water exposed in the atmosphere, not only will it condense other water, but it can capture neutrons. In fact, what they do at some experiments in physics where they're measuring, they use our water because they can measure how many neutrons were captured. If you know what your standard is, how many neutrons you have in a glass of water, and then you're doing your physics experiment, you can actually measure how much of that water was changed or captured a deuteron and became semi-heavy or heavy water. I don't think that's very common, and I'm certainly no expert in that at all. But what I do know is that the hydrology of Earth has a lot to do with where you find less deuterium and more deuterium on the planet. Simply when you have a hydrological cycle that's more amplified in terms of faster freezing and thawing, like at higher elevations or higher latitudes, you're going to have a better fractionation. So you're able to separate the heavy from the light. And then there are interesting anomalies on the planet, like in the Himalayas and Antarctica and a couple other places I found myself where you have drastically lower deuterium than the surrounding area. Antarctica is very interesting because it's the lowest deuterium on the planet, 89 parts per million, whereas the North Pole is like 105 to 110. So you go, wow, why is the South Pole have less? That also has to do with the shape of the Earth. It's more like an egg shape. Like it's bigger at the South Pole than at the North Pole. It's a very interesting configuration, not like the globes that we spin in the classroom. But so yeah, in fact, if you're at the South Pole and you're at sea level, you could argue that that's the equivalent of like 4,000 or 5,000 feet if you were in the northern hemisphere. But regardless of that, what happened in Antarctica is this was a continent that shifted in temperature almost overnight or very quickly. So all that water was frozen or locked in time from about 50 to 80 million years ago when there was less deuterium. And sure enough, you had plants and animals grow bigger at that time. Of course, the magnetic field was bigger as well, more oxygen, more carbon dioxide, but less deuterium played a big part in the early Earth and if you choose to believe it, the size of it, plants and animals. So that's locked in time. You have a very interesting thing that happened in the Himalayas that took me a long time to figure this out and research because I was very interested in these Sherpas that not only have a genetic adaptation for better utilization of oxygen at higher elevations, because they're able to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, which no Westerner can do up until very recently. That's a different story. But the reason they do this, one of the reasons is because they drink water that is lower in deuterium, 125 around, okay? 125, 126 ppm at base camp and in that area, which is incredibly lower than anywhere else in that region. And so when you have less deuterium in your body, you're able to utilize oxygen better. So this is another benefit of deuterium depletion. So they're able to summit Mount Everest because they're deuterium depleted, not only in their bodies, but also from generation to generation. So those certain adaptations tend to improve. What I found is that, and I have the evidence to show this, there was a meteor that crashed there. Now, in this particular case, most meteors and comets and anything from outer space that has frozen water on it or ice usually has higher deuterium. So meteoric bombardment on this planet increased the deuterium amount. But in this particular case, there was a meteor that crashed there that was lower in deuterium. And this happened, I think 1.5 million years ago or something like that. I have to look at the original research, but it was far enough back that it is incredible to understand that made it into hydrological cycle. That water made it in that localized system of condensation, rain, and it's still there. And that water in that, and because places that have their own weather pattern, have their own weather system away from the hydrological cycle of the ocean, those are the ones that have less deuterium, because where does it come from? Well, the oceans are full of it. And if you have a local system where you're not getting that ocean water, then you're going to have lower deuterium. Also in higher latitudes, like I said, because it's just that whole cycle is quicker. So the fractionation is a little bit more precise. So this is kind of where deuterium comes from on the planet and why it's been increasing. The thing that is most exciting as it applies to us is that through deuteronomics, we've discovered that the optimal deuterium amount for the body, if you want to do a saliva test, is about 120 something, right? 125, 120 to 130, even a little lower. That's where our biology is most comfortable. That's what it can manage. That's what it's adapted to manage. And then if you look at our water inside the mitochondria, the metabolic water in the innermost confined spaces of the mitochondria in the matrix, you find that is 25 to 40 ppm deuterium. So trying to keep deuterium out of those places where energy is made because it just gets in the way. It's like if you have a perfect new beautiful motor all oiled up, geared up, ready to go, and somehow you get a couple grains of sand in it. This is what's happening to us, and there's more and more sand coming, and eventually it shuts it down.
I want to thank my sponsor, Lightwater Scientific, who helped me deliver free valuable information to you and also allow me to have great guests on this channel. Lightwater Scientific produce the purest and most deuterium-depleted water in the world. Depleting or lowering your deuterium has numerous health benefits, from better metabolic health, more energy, greater resilience, less brain fog, increased physical performance, enhanced healing, and healthier mitochondria. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, also known as heavy water, because it's bigger and heavier than regular hydrogen. Even though deuterium makes up only 0.02% of hydrogen, it's found everywhere. Deuterium is a burden to your body because it interferes with the intricate chemical reactions that occur by slowing them down. Deuterium is kryptonite to your mitochondria, and we need healthy mitochondria to produce energy. There's over 60 years of scientific research on the negative effects of too much deuterium on health, and also the positive benefits of lowering deuterium in the body. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water is 100% safe and non-toxic. In fact, it's the closest in structure to the metabolic water that your mitochondria produce. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water comes in 5 or 10 parts per million glass or plastic bottles, so level up your health by leveling down your deuterium today. The purchase link is in the show notes, and use code Dr. Sara for a discount off your order.
So what I was saying is 60 to 70,000 years ago, you had a rapid rise in deuterium on our planet. Now, if you look at it, Homo sapiens sapien, we haven't been around for that long, 300,000, 150,000 years. A lot of that was in the Ice Age. So we adapted processes biologically, as all mammals did, to make do with this problem on this planet, this deuterium problem. And so the strategy that we created, you could talk about the Krebs cycle. Anyway, optimal 125 ppm in the body, which is kind of what it was in most of the places that humans live. And then you had the glaciers melt after the Ice Age. And if you're listening to this in Toronto or Chicago, look up and imagine a mile of ice overhead. So when all these glacials around the world melted, it released an incredible amount of methane into the atmosphere. And that methane is full of hydrogen. It's primarily made of hydrogen. So there's more chances that that hydrogen will have a deuteron in it. So that increased the deuterium content. So right now we're about 20% higher than what we should be for our biological optimal zone. Not to mention the diet that people are on, the standard American diet or the Western diet. It is putting much more deuterium on our bodies, not to mention our eating habits. Also our breathing habits, over breathing, mouth breathing. These all have a role. Being sedentary, all these things, fight or flight, parasympathetic versus sympathetic. All these things are increasing our stress, increasing our deuterium levels, and decreasing our ability to mount an immune response. So we want to hit these things at the foundation. We want to intervene at that core level where we can stop everything else. You know, a stitch in time saves 9, as they say. So this is where we're at right now.
Well, that's fascinating. Just before you move on, how does stress stop the body from depleting deuterium? Does it make deuterium stay, or does it just stop the person excreting it properly?
I think what stress does is you look at the parasympathetic versus sympathetic. So when you're sympathetic fight or flight mode, everything stops, right? Like your digestion stops. Everything puts you in a state of defense and stress. So your detox pathways, they're compromised. So hydrogen exchange, you could say, may be compromised. You know, it's the same thing as when you're usually ATP is produced how? Well, it's recycled from ADP. right? You just add that other phosphate on there, and there you go again, ADP to ATP. But when you're stressed, what happens? You start dumping the ATP. Now it has to be, now that whole cycle has to start from absolute scratch, ribose, etc. So same thing with stress. And even worse, when we go into a fight or flight mode, originally that was it was supposed to be an authentic response, meaning that if you were into sympathetic, you were ready to fight or flight. Now we go into a sympathetic response, fight or flight mode, driving in our cars, not moving. We're like, right? So that produces enormous amount of the wrong chemicals in our bodies. Adrenaline being one, cortisone being another. So this is a complex relationship. Again, I'm just asking these questions, and I'm informing myself and others as to what I am experientially witnessing myself, and qualitatively and sometimes quantitatively with others. So like for me, I really believed in the science of this, and I didn't have any DDW. And then I started drinking it, and the science proved me right, because that was the hypothesis. If this, then this. Okay, let's try it. And it was a really elaborate scheme to get there, but we did. And now a few others can benefit from it as well. So it all makes sense, because it's now just to touch on some things globally that you were talking about the planet. There's a whole strategy for deuterium depletion in nature. When you start looking at the migration of birds, why they fly 2,000 miles, and whales too, why they travel these long migratory distances to raise their young, to give birth, to lay eggs, or give birth. It's a deuterium strategy. They're going where they have slightly more energy, slightly more chance of survival. Why would you return from the tropics? It's beautiful. You're drinking a Mai Tai, you're you're under the sun, listening to reggae. You got to go back up to northern Canada to lay your eggs. Why do you do it? It's deuterium depletion. There's less deuterium there, so the birds fly all that distance, spend all that energy just to gain a little bit more energy for their next generation. This is fascinating. Whales do the same thing. So there is a global implication to this whole thing, and it does get very interesting spiritually as well, because if you look at the Bible, they say we separated the two waters. Two waters. What are the two waters? So only now we're understanding what this is all about. And we're also understanding that, at least in some of the more forward-reaching theories about the neutron, that why is it there? It's totally neutral. We don't know the function of it, or we don't know really what it is. And there's some clues now that the neutron is just a chrysalis. It's just a latent proton-electron pair waiting to be born. And it's stuck in that state from the very first seconds of the beginning of the universe. So it does get really mystical, and even beyond what I'm telling you. But on a functional level, you just see, what is it doing for me? Is it helping me, or is it not? Because at the end of the day, we have two directives as primitive humans. Certainly we've evolved, we think, with our frontal lobes to this level of technology, but at the end of the day, we have two directives. One, find something to eat. Two, don't get eaten. Okay, this is still where we're at. And somewhere in between that, we can reach greater heights of consciousness.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What we're really here for.
Absolutely, because I'm really interested in consciousness on whatever level you want to take it to. It's, you're open to say, because you've mentioned it before about the consciousness side. And when it comes to studying ancient texts, I always find really interesting phraseology in the Bible, the Book of Enoch, other texts. And I've heard the things like the father being referred to as a light, and then the mother and the mothers would be the water. So in terms of spirituality, regardless of what people's beliefs are, we respect them all. What would you be able to elaborate on with deuterium and spirituality and consciousness?
Well, if you look at it like you have in the beginning, you have the one, which is the proton, and then you have to make two for the Leela or the play to unfold, right? The action and reaction. And so this sets up this sets the stage for our entire existence. And then you have to look at, okay, this is the beginning. Well, where's the end? Where's the conclusion of it? Well, the conclusion is that the neutron finds itself. It finally finds its ultimate purpose and awakens to be a proton electron pair, because it really, but you need this because it builds the other elements, and it differentiates our experience. And if I were to say, what is the universe looking for? It's looking for the fresh idea. It's looking for something new. It's looking for novelty versus habit, as Terence McKenna used to say. So it's like, that's why humans, we continuously want to know more. We want to go faster. We want to experience things that we do not necessarily have any frame of reference to. And this is what makes us star beings, because we're reaching for something we do not know, and yet we believe exists. So this sets us along the path, both physically and mentally and spiritually. You can derive all these things from it. So I find it very fascinating. Right now, I'm deeply involved in the engineering of creating a deuterium depleted production facility here in the United States. And then you start looking at, if this is something that's meant to happen for humanity, why is it so hard and mechanical? Where it has to do with energy. We're still in a state where we're producing energy through a conventional means that's of an explosive nature, not an implosive nature. So we haven't really cracked the room temperature superconductor yet, which is the holy grail. I had a T-shirt that I made that I wore, anti-gravity is a human right. We all have a right to levity and anti-gravity, in the sense that it's the same as immortality. It's the decay of spin in this 3D existence that we're in, or this multi-dimensional existence that we're in. We have this problem of a decay of spin, which we can call entropy, and we have some solutions for it, perhaps syntropy. But ultimately, it's the unwinding of your mortal coil. And as long as we're here, why not, instead of being all heady and mental with trying to figure out everything else that we're doing and compartmentalizing things, why not settle on what has already been discovered by generations before us, which is the unified field? Let's all agree on it. Everything is connected. And then start to understand it. And then the most important questions for mortals would be, well, how do we extend this mortality? How do we slow down this unwinding of our mortal coil? How can it be reversed? The reversal is the stuff of legend and of lore, and what is filtered down through us through ancient texts and modern fantasy. So this is, what makes me really interested in this, because when you keep asking the right question, you get an answer. Imagine sitting around a campfire in the 1860s going, I wish something like a light bulb existed. You don't know really what it is, but you go, it's coming. So right now, we produce deuterium depleted water by using an enormous amount of energy. That's what makes it expensive. And we do this for our benefit because it saves us a lot of energy. So, but as soon as we get to a point where we can take energy from the ethers, this essentially will become available to everybody. And how do you shift consciousness? Well, you make the first step is you make the hungry not hungry. And second is you remove the suffering from the suffered, right? So you cannot be a free thinker, and you can't open your mind if you're hungry and if you're suffering. So that's the first step. So we need to create that levity and that health in ourselves. When we're young, we feel impervious. We can do anything. And when we're old, we are a little bit more cautious, because we know that we have more to lose if we injure or hurt ourselves. So safety being the first and primary concern of our biology, only when we have that do we start traveling to the stars in our minds and on paper, or in any kind of way do we become explorers of things that are beyond those basic human needs of survival. So water is the most intimate relationship we have because it's 98.9%. We are 98.9% water by molecular weight. So I maybe air is a more intimate relationship, but so I try to uh, I try to ask these questions because really it's more of a selfish desire to know. We're born without a manual for this life, and a selfish desire to uh, slow down aging. And if I could be a guinea pig for myself, and it works, and I have scientific evidence and empirical, qualitative, quantitative evidence, I'm going to champion it like crazy. And so, yes, I think what we have here is a functional fountain of youth. And at the end of the day, and at the core, that fountain of youth is just putting the water in your body that is closest to the water that your body makes. That's it. New standard. We figure that out. Eventually, we'll figure out how to make it in a way where we don't use conventional energy. Look, we produce about 50 to 100 watts of power. Yet collectively, we use constantly 60,000 watts. We are energy hogs, vampires. We are energy hungry beings. And this is the fundamental problem that we have to solve as a species. If we have these massive energy demands, if we are so energy hungry, just like our mitochondria, energy hungry all the time, everything in nature wants to eat everything else. It wants energy. But if we are to evolve, we have to solve the problem of how we create our energy. And that's for our bodies and externally as well. So it all, of course, it all ties together, from the plants, the animals, the humans. We all tie together. And at the ultimate, if you say what it's all about, it's for energy. It's a hunt for energy. And it's a strategy. We're trying to develop strategies for energy acquisition and energy retention. So I haven't seen anything else besides deuterium depletion that creates a net energy benefit as you age, because everything will give you immediate energy, but what effect does that have on the aging process? This is the first thing that I found, in my humble opinion, that actually has a net energy benefit.
Yeah, you've touched on so many really important points. And I think something I'm really interested in as well is energy and time, and Pyrogene studies and dissipative structures, because, we do, in simple terms, waste a lot of energy. And it's the idea, how do we keep the energy within ourselves? But then there's always a function of time to do with how energy flows in physics or
Right.
in matter. And also, to make deuterium depleted water, there's a lot of time involved, I'd imagine. And then obviously aging's all about time. Fair enough, it's like an illusion. We won't go into that unless you want to, because it's kind of a massive topic. But you
Yeah.
also, mushrooms themselves, don't they deplete deuterium in the area in which they exist? Because you mentioned Terence McKenna, and I think if people haven't heard of him, he's well worth a listen. Um, and then the other thing you mentioned was, which reminded me about one of your other interests, because I found somebody called Dr. Alex Ling, and he makes water soluble frankincense and myrrh and gold in water, and he imbues it with a frequency, because I'm into all sorts of weird things, and I'm open
Yeah.
to anything like you, and I'll always try it. And I've seen frankincense and myrrh and gold and other things just come up over and over and over, because sometimes I keep seeing the same theme coming from the spiritual people or the scientists or the physicists, and I think, okay, there's probably something to this. What have you got to say about gold? Because we could go on
Well,
for ages about frankincense and myrrh, but then gold, I know, is an area of interest for you.
I wrote a little booklet called Gold Catalyst to Radiant Health. It has to do with my journey and expertise in gold alchemy. So I have a lot to say about gold. One thing I can say is it's not recognized by U.S. Department of, it's not recognized as a U.S. RDA. There's no recommended daily allowance for gold by USDA. So, but there is, we do have a U.S. recommended daily allowance. We just don't realize it. So just as we have a need for all other trace elements or minerals, gold, oddly enough, has been excluded from this. So that's the first question. Well, they'll tell you gold is inert. Yeah, it's completely inert. Well, it is if it's in a metallic state. But as soon as you start reducing it down to a colloidal, or then even a diatomic, or let's just venture to say a monatomic state, it starts to exhibit wholly different properties. And maybe this is a lead into the quantum aspects of deuterium, because the gold is a seriously long topic, and we could go there, but just wanted to say gold alchemy does exist, and gold is good for biology, and there's reasons for this. And you can download a little booklet I wrote, and a lot of it is in there. It's quite fascinating. And I had a company called ormusgold.com. I'm not actively making it right now because it's hard. It's a hard process to do gold alchemy, to make monatomic or Cooper paired gold. Colloidal is very easy to make, but anything that's in the 1.2 to 1.8 angstrom size, which essentially is a non-covalent diatom of gold, which is actually two monatoms of gold that through a Cooper pair are now in a high spin state. That's a whole other form of matter, you would say. It's an exotic matter, and gold is just the substrate for it. What it has become, we do not know, but we call it gold because it's very easy to pop it back into gold. So it's unstable. At least I'm not adept enough to make it stable. I can make it stable enough, but not where it's a new element. It certainly is going to be affected by everything around it, because that's a fascinating subject that I can probably go on for hours about, because I've spent a lot of time interested in these things. Again, these are things that are of esoteric nature, but we have a history of this. So that's why I got into these things, because they have great promise and they were overlooked. But when you talk about alchemical gold chemistry and going down to something that's measured in the angstrom, not even nanometers, you start talking about quantum effects. And now you start talking about exotic matter and things you don't readily see in nature or that you can observe. And so what fascinated me most about when I start getting into, people talk about quantum physics, so they talk about the quantum, and everybody's got a different definition of it. It's kind of a bankrupt subject at this point. But what's so interesting about human biology is that we have to break the laws of physics to exist. And when you look at it, you go, what? You have to break the laws of physics to exist? That's absurd. That doesn't make sense, because everything is on this foundation of our material science. And yet, in order for life to happen, hydrogen has to quantum tunnel, meaning it's like a genie. It shows up on one side of a wall or a mountain and says, I have to get over this hill, or I have to get through this wall. There's no door. But if I don't get to the other side now, instantly, immediately, nothing will happen. There will be no life. There will be no breath. There will be no respiration. I have to do this now. And then it does. And it crosses that barrier at the quantum level. And it's moving too fast for anybody to stop it and ask, how did you do that? And at the quantum level, we cheat. We break the laws of physics because we need the energy. And the energy we use, we can't explain that quantum tunneling. And what we need to know, fundamental truth, is that elements don't quantum tunnel. The only element that quantum tunnels is hydrogen, it's protons, and smaller subatomic particles quantum tunnel. And deuterium is the last thing that quantum tunnels, right? As other elements are formed. So it does quantum tunnel. Deuteron does quantum tunnel just like hydrogen, protium, but it does so a lot slower. So this is the quantum implication of our biology. When you're talking in the quantum level where things can exist in two states, in two places at once, and everything works. Imagine if you were in Star Trek, they have the beam me up, Scotty. They have the you could beam somebody from one place to another. Or imagine that we can really do that, because that's kind of what quantum tunneling is. But imagine parts of you show up a little later, okay? After you've already arrived and started moving. That's what's happening with deuterium. It quantum tunnels, but much slower than hydrogen. So this has incredible implications, like you said, for anything upstream. Upstream, you're looking at DNA and everything upstream of that. We haven't even gotten to protein. So you're going from the micro, the nano to the micro, or the quantum to the nano to the micro to the macro. So when we're looking at the quantum, you see these things first. That's the first thing we have to ask the teacher in the chemistry class. Excuse me, can you teach me about quantum tunneling, because it seems to break the laws of physics, and we seem to be okay with it at that level. So if that's possible, can physics be broken? Can we defy gravity at a macro level? Well, if we could do it at the quantum and perhaps at the nano, we could do it at the macro as well. And these are the things that we still haven't arrived at as a species, but we're headed there. So gold is incredibly implicated in this, because it's something that is a catalyst. It's a catalyst for thought. It's a catalyst for biology. Just like in 2001, A Space Odyssey, you have this obelisk. What did it do? It's just a catalyst for evolution. So we have these exotic substances on this planet. I'm very interested in them because they were seeded here could be from a previous incarnation of humans, civilizations, but I believe that there's more than we know, and that's why it's exciting to get up in the morning to try to unravel these things. And ultimately, like I told you, before we were being recorded, these are phenomenal things to be excited about. But most of all, I'm excited. How does it help us? How does it help us with health, disease, long life, health span? How does it help us find something to eat and not get eaten? So.
Oh, absolutely, because it is all about, with vibrations and stuff. I learned a long time ago, you have to bring everybody else with you. It's not just about me wanting to obtain some higher state, but you need to look after everybody else as well. So what you're saying is really important. And also, I think that reminded me that you have what was it called? It wasn't a food farm. What did you call it? The food forest.
Food forest.
Yeah.
I think in this day and age, everybody has to eat.
Yeah.
So do we know where it's coming from? Do we have a relationship with the soil, the farmer, the environment? To me, these things are important. I feel like where I am in my life, in my age, I'm behind the 8 ball if I'm not either sourcing the food from a trusted source or growing it myself with everything that I know about soil biology, nutrition. So ideally, what everyone does is plant a food forest, because a food forest will sustain you many years ahead. If you plant a vegetable garden, that's great. You'll enjoy it for the summer and fall. You'll do it again next year. But if you plant a food forest and a very interwoven relationship of plants and animals that sustain a forest of things that are edible, right? Everything in it is food. So food forest is the way. We it's really why we're here as humans. If you look at it in the Bible, it tells us, we were in the Garden of Eden, and what was wrong with that? We have prehensile thumbs, and we can help things. We can, if a turtle fell on its back, we can put it back on its feet. If a fruit fell, we like the taste of it, we can replant it, we can spread it, right? We're essentially fruit farmers here, so it gives us everything we need, and we barely find out all the fruits that nature has us, all the varieties of different fruits and foods and edibles. And I think this diversity of biology, this diversity of natural and nutritional sources is incredibly important for us, incredibly important for our mental, physical, spiritual well-being. It's interesting. We get into a lot of trouble with these prehensile thumbs, with these hands. And if you look at dolphins, you see that they're also polydactyl. They have 5 fingers below their fins, right? And so at some point they had 5 fingers, and they made a conscious decision as a species, said, if we keep evolving with these things, they're just going to get us in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back in the ocean. And what they didn't account for was that other mammals would come up, and we would say, yes, we want these prehensile hands. And like Zorba said, man gave us hands to grab. So that's what we do, we grab. But we are supposed to grab in a beneficial manner, right? So propagate is kind of the grabbing that I'm talking about. So let's propagate a biodiversity of the biome, of a genetic biodiversity of food that we can sustain ourselves from, because it shouldn't be that hard. I mean, we've been here think about it. If somebody planned ahead, like your grandfather or great-grandfather, planted some walnut tree or some fruit trees, now that thing is feeding the entire village, the entire neighborhood. Somebody has to plan ahead. And then if you plan ahead, we don't have these problems that cause us to go into war and conflict, because a major one of them is who controls the resources of food. And so I think these things are important to me. I try to look at everything. Like I said, the energy. We produce a small amount of energy, like on a treadmill. We could boil water in like half an hour on a stationary bicycle. Yet we demand so much. We demand, and we just got to have it. So I'm trying to look at how do we really fit into this system outside of being informed of the public school educational system that I'm a product of, but go beyond that and go, what is the macro, what is the micro? As above, so below; as within, so without. So looking at kind of things this way and seeing, well, where can what really is something that is of my interest, and what is my concern, and what is of my influence, and then going, well, I'm certainly going to devote my time to what is under my influence. Concern is great, but influence is better, because it can help you, it can help me. And that's kind of a little bit of my philosophy. Sorry, I'm so long-winded when I talk.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's fine. It's interesting because I think there's sort of so much more to life than just biochemistry, which I think is fascinating. But then after sort of, I don't know, sort of how many years have I done it? Nearly over 20. You kind of seek other explanations and different ways of looking at the world. So, and especially spirituality in all different contexts. And like you said about the thumbs and the tongue, because the Bible warns about both of those, and it's up to us how we use our hands and our tongue. So again,
Right.
the will aspect, we have that we have a choice. That's what I've learned. I think it's wonderful. I've got the freedom I still have choices. So yes. Before we finish, with your conference that you're sponsoring, it's in Mexico. Do you want to talk a bit about who's going to be there and what kind of topics? Because it's going to be kind of high level. That's why what you've been talking about is great, because it's good for people to think in a more sort of higher level. What's happening at the conference and how do people join it and everything about it?
Well, if you made it this far in this podcast, this is a perfect conference for you.
Yeah, it's like the self-selecting sales funnel that, all the best people, the right people end up at the bottom. Yes.
If you've gone this far and you heard what I was saying, this is where you want to be. November 8th, 9th, and 10th of this year. Get your ticket now, watersymposium.org. There's only 200 places. It's really, I'm putting myself on a limb here because I'm gathering some speakers that are world class. You will not want to miss these people. It's because I don't want to miss these people. So this is not just theoretical or knowledge for your, for your intellectual pursuits. This is really something that's really critical for your life, for your philosophy, for your strategy, to come and be part of this and listen to what these speakers have to say. Some of them you may never get to see again because they just don't come out for events. So it's a personal favor. So we're going to go around the full globe and 360 structure of understanding water. And again, two things should make you, two things made me or inspired me to make this first and foremost pursuit or interest in my life, and that is one very little studied, misunderstood water. Like when I was a kid, I drank tap water, even though my parents would get water from springs. When we were in Soviet Union, by the time we got to Chicago, I would just tap water. Okay, it's fine. Water is water. Then I had some glacial spring water my friend gave me, and I go, this is completely different. And at 16 years old, I go, wait, water is not the same, but it looks and tastes like water. So this set off a deep level of inquiry. And if the fact that we're not 98.9% or 98.89% water by molecular weight, and we don't know the first thing of how water moves in our bodies, if that's not important to you, then don't come to this conference. But if that's a subject that you're fascinated by, like so many are, because this is really if you're after the fountain of youth, if you're after longevity, if you're after the right strategy of health, this is one of the first questions you ask. What's the right water to drink? And how does water move in my body? How is it used? I went to dry fasting. I went 6 days, multiple times without food or water, just trying to understand what water is, and what it's doing for us, and why we need it so badly. Just on a consciousness level, not on a. Now I'm going to read about it. I'm just going to say, just withhold it and see what the body does. Just don't give it the body any and see what happens. And just study that. Study yourself first. And so if you know water, you may better know thyself. And this is the whole impetus of this conference. We want to better know ourselves. Let's get into some of the water science and the secrets and some of the mysteries of water. So this is 3 days dedicated to this in Tulum, which is a water world. It's a phenomenal place where you can experience multiple cenotes. These are freshwater caves and springs, and it's just a water world, a very tropical, very healing place. So this is where we decided that we would invite everybody to come and participate and take in and be endowed and empowered by the information that's going to be presented. So I hope everybody that's listening to this buys a ticket right now.
Who's attending? Because I know Dr. Pollock's going, and also I've got into the nano bubble world, and I'll just call them the nano bubble gas people. And this is, I haven't sold it properly about putting different gases into nano bubbles like carbon dioxide and nitric oxide and things, and then they have a nano bubble spa. are they going? And because no matter what, I always find new avenues, and because like you, I'm always asking questions, and I've had a very long time to ask questions and do everything wrong. So that's one aspect of water that
there'll be a
oh good.
something to that. I have to find out who you're talking about exactly, but because I do have a friend that's deep in that.
Is it
Uh,
Charles? I know
Charles, yeah,
Yes, yeah,
yeah.
Charles is great. Yes. So if Charles is going,
So,
he's worth.
what's interesting? What's interesting is some of the earlier studies that we didn't talk about of the miraculous healing benefits of hot springs, and people, some have honed in that it's the dissolved gases in those hot springs water.
Yeah.
So that's a fascinating subject. Yeah, I mean, primary water is another fascinating subject, but Dr. Cruz will be there, Jerry will be there. There'll be some names that maybe people haven't heard of. My friend Arkady Shirin, who is a bona fide yoga master, probably I'm fortunate enough to have him as a friend for the last almost 30 years, but a bona fide true yoga master that knows things that is just 100 years ahead. And that's really what we're presenting here is concepts, ideas, and truths, revelations that are 100 years ahead. But what's odd is there's also a heritage to them. So that we have, well, we could say that we're not that smart. We are just standing on the shoulders of giants, and a lot of times discovering ancient wisdom and ancient texts. And all of a sudden it's new and it's a revelation. Maybe it was just hidden from us before because it was cloaked in language and we didn't understand it until we went through certain initiations that we had to go through. So anyway, this is going to be an awesome conference. I don't think people will be, if you like going to conferences and shows, expos, symposiums, this is going to be different, and I think very very beneficial.
Oh,
If you're called to it.
oh yeah, it's because I've looked at the plan anyway, so I can always add some pictures and things to this. But I think if people are interested, like I always say, that if Victor's into something, it's going to be good. And Dr. Pollock will be there, and there are some other important people or interesting people.
It'll be good because if you what I value most is new information.
Yeah.
Right. Because where new information is, prosperity exists.
Yes.
There's no prosperity without new information, and this is new information. So, in a world where it's hard to find new information, this will be new information for you. I can almost guarantee that.
Great. So if people want, I'll put the links to what you've mentioned in the show notes.
Watersymposium.org.
Yeah. Okay, great. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to touch on, or any rabbit holes you want to open for people to give them something to think about? Because I like doing things like that.
Well, I would love to continue the conversation about alchemy and superconducting exotic matter in our own bodies and brains. I'd love to continue the energy conversation. It's back.
Yes.
I lost my main microphone. Battery ran out. See, there's the decay of spin, right?
Yes,
exactly. Find me a battery that'll last forever, and I'll show you.
Yeah, that's a shame that Nikola Tesla's work all got destroyed, because that was a way to get energy out of the ether, along with other great scientists.
There are many people that have discovered this. Some have taken it to the grave, willingly and unwillingly. I've seen it myself. I can verifiably tell you honestly that I have seen this type of energy production, but we're in a paradigm paralysis where the powers that be will not let us evolve, or have this crucial piece of, because it'll change everything, right? Wars are fought over energy. So if everybody has a little box that powers their house and it never stops working, not only does that change the entire paradigm of this planet, but it also gives us a window into what's actually possible in our own bodies as well. So this is the paradigm that we're locked into, whether we like it or not. Well, we don't like it, actually.
No.
Most of us don't. And but it's eventually the floodgates will get broken down. You know, it'll just be you won't be able to contain the ingenuity and the novelty that's coming, and that's already here. So it's what's quite fascinating is to find those people and those discoveries on this planet that are solely unique and solely millennia ahead of time, like you mentioned, Nikola Tesla, and yet they're here now. And this is the quest that is so it's so fascinating to me, and that I love pursuing, because all the answers are there. There really are.
Oh yeah, definitely. Whether it's Rife machines or Wilhelm Reich's orgon accumulator, there are geniuses alive still. People like Harry Rhodes in the UK that nobody's ever. It's the people nobody's ever not heard of yet, like the eccentric old scientist somewhere that doesn't know how to market or use social media. Those are the people who've got the answers, and it's just about finding them.
They do exist,
Yeah.
and it's just not mainstream. It hasn't. The plantation hasn't approved it yet for wider use.
Anyway.
So we want to let's step off that plantation. Come down to the symposium. It'll be 3 days of out of time that will propel us in time in our evolution, and step out of the paradigm and start making decisions for yourself, and start what you do, Sarah. So I'm so appreciative, because you are open sourcing real, practical, real beneficial knowledge that people can use and apply in their lives to create a wise decision for anything they do in this aspect, health, which touches on everything. And certainly something I haven't talked about too was food as medicine, which is really the medicine that I practice, that you can't put me in jail for practicing medicine without a license, because it's just food, and water is part of that. So yeah, no, thank you for what you're doing, and getting this information out there to people, and doing so on a regular basis, and building up an audience of people, and a real authentic message, and a authentic search for truth.
Great. I'm sure you'll be back on to tickle our minds and blow some people's brains. But thank you very much for your time. I mean, like you said, there's only 200 places. So,
well, you're a speaker, so you have to come. You are, yeah. You're a moderator.
Okay.
For our panel. Yeah, you're on there.
Okay, well, that's gonna like we were talking off camera. Sometimes, you know, things happen in your life, and you just have to like go somewhere. The migratory mentality, I called it, to accept sometimes you've got to pick up and just go somewhere.
Look, I'm trying to create a synergy here, and the definition of synergy is where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Oh yeah,
so I'm calling in the best parts that exist, and we're going to create a whole that's greater than we are. And that's the whole reason why we're doing this.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure people who got this far will have got value from it, and there's lots more to come. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this thought-provoking. The links to the conference are in the description, and I'm sure Victor will be back on the channel again to talk about other aspects of health and aging, and we'll probably give you an update of what happened at the conference if you're not able to attend, but I hope you can come. Just a reminder that my basic quantum biology course, my new one, and my minerals course now comes with a free 15-minute Zoom if you get stuck with the content and just need a little bit of help, and the links for those in the description. Thank you for following the channel. So very soon we have Dr. Borosh and Dr. Gabor Shomoli back on again, and Gabor's going to be allowed to go as deep as he wants into deuterium because it's his life's work. And also Dr. Martin Moreed is going to walk us through all about circadian biology, blue light, circadian rhythms, and all of the studies and his work over the past 40 years in this area. So stay tuned for more great guests.